Kids aren't allowed in my car. Those 6 words changed the way I looked at my father forever. My name is Serena Whitmore, and until that day, I still held on to a small hope that my father, Alden Whitmore, might someday care about me and my daughter. He had always been distant, but I kept telling myself that was just how he was. I thought things would get better with time. I was wrong. It happened during a family gathering at my father's house. Everyone was eating and talking when my 8-year-old daughter, Juniper, suddenly became very sick. Her face turned pale, and she started trembling. She complained about sharp pain and looked like she might faint at any moment. I panicked. The nearest hospital was not far away, but my car had been giving me problems for days. My father was standing outside beside his car, ready to leave. I rushed over to him and asked if he could help us get to the hospital. Before I could even finish explaining, he looked at me and said, "Kids aren't allowed in my car." At first, I thought he was joking. Then I saw the serious expression on his face. I stared at him in disbelief. Juniper was not some random child asking for a ride. She was his granddaughter. She was scared, sick, and needed help. Yet he showed no concern at all. "Dad, she needs a doctor," I said. He simply shrugged and repeated himself. "Kids aren't allowed in my car." None of the relatives standing nearby said a word. Some looked uncomfortable, but nobody challenged him. It was as if they were used to seeing him treat us this way. Fighting back tears, I helped Juniper into my car and prayed it would start. Thankfully it did. I drove straight to the hospital while my heart pounded the entire way. The doctors treated Juniper, and she eventually recovered. I was grateful she was okay. But as I sat beside her hospital bed that night, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. My father hadn't just rejected me. He had rejected his own granddaughter. And I had no idea that this was only the beginning of a much bigger betrayal. A few days later, life slowly returned to normal. Juniper was back at school, smiling again, and trying to forget her hospital visit. I was doing my best to move on too, but my father's behavior kept replaying in my mind. One afternoon, I left work early to pick up some paperwork from a client. As I drove through a quiet neighborhood on the other side of town, I noticed a familiar car parked near a private elementary school. It was my father's sedan. I almost kept driving. My father had no reason to be there, but it wasn't my business. Then I saw him step out of the driver's seat. A little girl jumped out from the passenger side. I froze. The girl looked around 7 or 8 years old, close to Juniper's age. My father smiled at her, adjusted her jacket, and handed her a lunch bag. Then he lifted a backpack from the back seat and carried it for her. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This was the same man who wouldn't drive his own granddaughter to the hospital. The same man who claimed children were never allowed in his car. Yet here he was, acting like a loving grandfather. The girl hugged him before running toward the school entrance. My father stood there watching her with a smile I hadn't seen in years. Something felt wrong. I waited until he left, then drove away, trying to convince myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. But 2 days later, I saw them again. This time they were leaving an ice cream shop together. A few days after that, I spotted them at a park. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a favor for a friend. My father clearly played a major role in this child's life. The more I saw, the harder it became to ignore. Juniper had spent years wondering why her grandfather never attended her school events, birthdays, or recitals. Meanwhile, he seemed happy to make time for someone else's child. I didn't know who the little girl was, but I needed answers. For the first time in my life, I started wondering if my father had built another family somewhere along the way and simply decided that mine no longer mattered. I decided to stop guessing and start asking questions. A week after seeing my father with the little girl for the 3rd time, I called him and asked if we could meet for coffee. To my surprise, he agreed. For a moment, I thought maybe he was finally ready to be honest. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. As soon as I mentioned the little girl, his expression changed. "What little girl?" he asked. I stared at him. There was no confusion in his voice. He knew exactly who I meant. "The girl you've been driving around," I said. "The one from the school." His jaw tightened. "You're imagining things, Serena." That answer only made me more suspicious. I told him I had seen them together several times. Instead of explaining, he stood up, dropped money on the table, and left without another word. That night I called my Aunt Beverly. She normally loved talking, but when I mentioned the girl, she suddenly became quiet. "Your father has his reasons," she finally said. "What reasons?" "I think it's best if you leave it alone." Then she quickly ended the call. Over the next few days, I contacted several cousins. Every conversation felt strange. Some claimed they didn't know anything. Others changed the subject completely. One cousin even told me I was making trouble where none existed. The reactions didn't make sense. If there was nothing to hide, why was everyone acting nervous? The final piece came when I ran into my father's attorney, Graham Mercer, outside a restaurant. He had known me since I was a child. When I casually mentioned the little girl, his face lost color. For a second, he looked genuinely worried. Then he forced a smile and said he couldn't discuss family matters. Family matters. Those two words stayed in my mind the entire drive home. That was when I knew I wasn't chasing a rumor. The girl was connected to my father somehow, and several people already knew the truth. The problem was that every single one of them seemed determined to keep me from finding it. After my conversation with Graham Mercer, I couldn't stop thinking about what he had said. Family matters. The words kept repeating in my head. I decided that if nobody was willing to tell me the truth, I would find it myself. My father owned several businesses and investment properties. Most of his affairs were private, but some information was available through public records and company filings. Every evening after work, once Juniper was asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and started searching. At first, I found nothing unusual. Then one night I came across something that caught my attention. A consulting company connected to one of my father's businesses had been making regular payments to the same person for years. The name was Marissa Holloway. The amount wasn't small. The payments appeared consistently, month after month, year after year. I wrote down everything I could find and kept digging. The next step was learning who Marissa Holloway was. That turned out to be easier than expected. Within a few days, I found an address and a few public records connected to her name. Then I saw a photograph. The moment I saw it, my stomach dropped. Standing beside Marissa was the little girl. The same girl I had seen with my father. Everything suddenly felt much more serious. This wasn't a random child he occasionally helped. Her mother had been receiving money linked to my father's business interests for years. I stared at the screen for a long time. Questions filled my mind. Why was he paying her? What was the relationship between them? Why had everyone acted so nervous whenever I asked about the girl? I printed every document I found and organized them into a folder. The deeper I looked, the stranger everything became. There were records connecting Marissa to properties my father had helped purchase. There were financial transactions stretching back much further than I expected. None of it looked accidental. By then, I wasn't wondering whether my father knew this family. I knew he did. The real question was how deep the connection went. For the first time, a frightening possibility entered my mind. What if my father wasn't simply helping another family? What if he had been living a completely separate life for years while keeping me and Juniper in the dark? I couldn't sleep after what I found. The documents, the payments, the name Marissa Holloway, everything kept looping in my mind. It didn't feel complete, like there was still a missing piece that I couldn't see clearly on my own. That's when I made the decision to hire a private investigator. A woman named Claire Danvers came recommended through a colleague. She didn't ask many questions, just listened carefully when I explained what I already knew. Before she left, she said one line that stayed with me: "People don't usually hide nothing." It took her just over a week to come back with answers. She didn't call first. She showed up at my door with a thick envelope and a hard expression on her face. I remember her handing it to me like she wasn't sure I was ready to open it. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. The first one hit me like a punch. My father, Alden Whitmore, standing at a school stage decorated with balloons. He was smiling, clapping, and standing right next to the same little girl I had seen before, Tessa. In another photo, he was helping her blow out birthday candles. In another, he was sitting in the front row at what looked like a dance recital. There were even vacation pictures, him walking beside her on a beach, holding her hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. My hand started shaking as I kept going through them. Claire's voice was calm, but firm. She told me she followed a timeline. These weren't isolated moments. This had been happening for almost 7 years. 7 years of events. School meetings. Family dinners. Trips. Normal everyday life. And in all that time, my daughter Juniper barely saw him. I remembered birthdays where he sent nothing but a short message, if anything at all. School plays he promised to attend but never showed up for. Hospital visits where I sat alone in waiting rooms with a sick child asking why Grandpa never came. At the time, I told myself he was busy. That maybe he just wasn't good at expressing love. Now I understood the truth was worse. He wasn't absent. He was present somewhere else. I laid the photos across my kitchen table, each one heavier than the last. The same man who treated Juniper like she was a burden was standing in the center of another child's life like he belonged there. For the first time, I stopped questioning if I was imagining things. I wasn't. My father hadn't just pulled away from us. He had built a different world where someone else's child had replaced mine. I couldn't carry the questions alone anymore. After everything I had seen, I decided to meet Marissa Holloway in person. I told myself I just wanted answers, but deep down I think I already knew this meeting would change something inside me. She agreed to meet me at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting with both hands wrapped around a coffee cup like she was trying to stay calm. At first, she looked nervous. Careful with her words. Like she was expecting anger from me. I didn't waste time. I told her everything I had found. The photos. The payments. My father being with her daughter. I watched her face closely, waiting for denial or confusion. Instead, she went silent. Then she said something I didn't expect. I thought you already knew all of this. Those words made my chest tighten. Knew what? I asked. She looked down at the table and slowly started talking. Her voice shook at first, but then it steadied, like she had carried this truth for too long. She said Alden had told her early on that I was unstable. That I struggled with responsibility. That I couldn't be trusted with my own child. I felt like the air left the room. Marissa continued, explaining that over time, my father used that story to justify why he was so involved in Tessa's life. He painted it like he was stepping in to protect a child who needed stability. According to her, everyone around him believed it. Even some family members. I sat there frozen, trying to process what I was hearing. My hands were cold, but I didn't even notice. It wasn't just that he ignored me. It wasn't just that he chose another child. He had been building a version of me that wasn't real. A version that made his actions look justified. Marissa finally looked up at me, her eyes filled with something that looked like guilt. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I thought you were part of it. But I wasn't part of anything. I was the one being erased. And in that moment, I realized the betrayal wasn't just what he did behind my back. It was the story he told about me while doing it. After meeting Marissa, I stopped sleeping properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same pattern repeating itself, my father building a life somewhere else while rewriting mine in ways I couldn't control. I needed proof of how far it all went. I went back to his business records, but this time I didn't stop at surface-level documents. I started looking for legal filings, estate papers, anything tied to long-term planning. It took days of searching through complex files and legal terms I barely understood. Most of it was boring at first, full of names of lawyers, asset lists, and trust accounts. But then I found something labeled under a private estate structure connected to Alden Whitmore. My hand slowed as I opened it. At first, it looked like standard inheritance planning, property divisions, investments, trust management. But the deeper I read, the more wrong it felt. There were multiple trusts created over the years. Not just one, but several layered structures. Then I saw the names of the beneficiaries. My stomach dropped. Tessa Holloway was listed. So was Marissa. I read it again, thinking I had misunderstood something. But it was clear. They were legally included in financial plans that were supposed to represent my father's family future. I kept scrolling, looking for Juniper's name. It wasn't there. Not once. I checked every page again, line by line, hoping I had missed something. But there was nothing. No mention of my daughter at all. Not even a placeholder. It was like she didn't exist in his long-term world. My hand started shaking so badly I had to put the papers down for a moment. This wasn't just emotional distance anymore. This wasn't just favoritism or neglect. This was planned. Intentional. I sat back in my chair, staring at the documents spread across my table, feeling something inside me go cold and still. He hadn't only chosen another child to care for in daily life, he had officially written my daughter out of his future. Juniper wasn't just being ignored anymore. She was being erased from a legacy she should have belonged to. And the worst part was realizing how many steps it had taken to make that possible. After finding the trust documents, I thought I had already reached the worst of it. I was wrong. A few days later, I received a message from an unknown number. At first, I ignored it. But the sender insisted they needed to talk about my father. The tone wasn't threatening, just heavy, like someone carrying something they had kept hidden for too long. We met at a small diner off the highway. The man introduced himself as Victor Langston. He said he used to work closely with Alden years ago. I had heard the name before in passing, but never paid attention to it. He didn't waste time on small talk. "I shouldn't be telling you this," he said, staring at his coffee, "but you deserve to know why things really fell apart." I stayed quiet. Then he told me about a business deal that went wrong almost a decade ago. A risky investment my father had pushed forward despite warnings. According to Victor, it nearly destroyed everything Alden had built. If the truth had come out, his reputation and finances would have collapsed completely. My chest tightened as I listened. But that wasn't the end. Victor said there was a complication. Marissa Holloway had been indirectly connected to the situation. She had access to certain information, documents, or knowledge. He didn't go into full detail, that could have exposed what really happened. Instead of going public, she made a different move. She stayed silent. And in return, Alden began supporting her financially. At first, Victor said, it was just payments meant to handle things quietly. A way to keep damage contained. Nothing personal, just control. But over time, things shifted. Months turned into years. What was supposed to be protection turned into routine support. Routine support turned into involvement. And involvement turned into attachment. Victor paused before saying the part that hurt the most. At some point, your father stopped treating it like damage control, he said. He started acting like that child's life mattered more than anything else around him. I felt my throat tighten. He explained that guilt played a role, but so did dependency. My father became emotionally tied to Tessa's world because it was built on secrecy, responsibility, and control he thought he could manage. It gave him a place where he wasn't being judged for past mistakes. Meanwhile, my world kept getting pushed aside. Victor looked at me then, his expression tired. He didn't plan to replace your daughter, he said quietly. But he ended up doing exactly that. I sat there in silence, staring at the table, trying to understand how a mistake from years ago could grow into something that erased my child's place in her own family. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was a chain of choices that slowly pushed Juniper out of a life she was supposed to be part of from the beginning. The invitation arrived like nothing had changed. Alden Whitmore was hosting a private family celebration at his estate. It was supposed to be a formal evening where he would share future plans for the family business and property holdings. The message was polite, almost proud, as if everything in the family was still under his control. I almost didn't go. But I did. When I arrived, the house was full of people I had grown up with, relatives, family friends, and a few of his business associates. Everyone looked dressed for success, laughing quietly, holding drinks, acting like nothing in our family had ever been broken. Alden stood near the center of it all, confident, calm, smiling. He greeted me like I was just another guest. That alone told me everything I needed to know. I didn't sit with the others. I stayed near the edge of the room, holding a folder that felt heavier with every passing minute. Inside were copies of everything I had found. The payments. The trust structures. The investigators' photos. The records of years I had been pushed aside. When the moment came, Alden tapped his glass. The room slowly went quiet. He began talking about family unity and future direction. People nodded, some even smiled, like they were waiting for something impressive. That was when I stepped forward. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply placed the folder on the long table in front of him. At first, he looked annoyed, then confused. But as I started speaking, his expression changed. I explained the payments tied to Marissa Holloway. I explained the private investigator's findings. I explained how Juniper had been excluded from every trust and plan he had created. I explained how my name had been twisted behind my back to justify it all. The room shifted. People stopped smiling. Attorneys leaned forward. One of them quietly picked up a document and started reading. A few relatives whispered to each other, their faces slowly turning pale as pieces of the truth connected in front of them. Alden tried to interrupt me once. Then again. But his voice didn't carry the same control it used to. Someone in the back asked a question about the trusts. Then another. Soon the entire room was no longer looking at me. They were looking at him. And for the first time, I saw cracks in the image he had built for decades. The calm confidence disappeared. The carefully protected reputation he had maintained in that house, in that family, started falling apart in real time. No one clapped when he finished speaking that night. Because he couldn't finish speaking at all. After that night at the estate, nothing stayed the same. News of what happened spread quietly at first, but it didn't stay quiet for long. Relatives who once defended Alden started pulling away. Phone calls went unanswered. Family meetings were suddenly postponed. The same people who used to praise him now avoided his name completely. His business circle reacted even faster. Longtime partners distanced themselves. A few contracts were paused for review. Conversations that used to be friendly turned cold and formal. It was like everyone was suddenly re-evaluating how much they could trust the man they thought they knew. Then came the legal side. Lawyers started reopening financial records connected to the trusts and private arrangements I had exposed. What once looked like simple estate planning was now being examined line by line. Every hidden detail created more questions than answers, and Alden was no longer able to control the narrative. But the hardest moment for me didn't come from any of that. It came from Juniper. One evening, I sat with her at home, unsure how to explain everything in a way she could understand. She had already felt the absence for years, but she had never known the reason behind it. So I told her the truth, slowly, carefully, without hiding anything. She didn't cry at first. She just sat very still, processing every word. Then she finally asked the question I had been dreading. Did I do something wrong? My heart broke in that moment. I pulled her closer and told her no. Not once. Not ever. That was the first time I saw her let go of the blame she had been carrying for something that was never her fault. Months passed after that. Life didn't become perfect, but it became peaceful in a way it hadn't been before. I focused on my work, on raising Juniper, on building something stable without depending on anyone who had already decided we didn't matter. The Whitmore name stopped controlling our lives. As for Alden, he became a distant figure in his own world. The people who once surrounded him were gone. The respect he relied on slowly disappeared, leaving behind silence and distance. And through it all, I realized something I hadn't understood before. Revenge wasn't the moment the truth came out in a room full of people. It wasn't watching everything he built fall apart. It was simpler than that. It was making sure my daughter finally knew she was never the problem. And proving that we never needed someone who chose to erase us from his life in the first place.